So, you're making your way through the Chaos route of Tactics Ogre Reborn, and you want to know what units you're going to be able to recruit, specifically in Chapter 3. Or maybe you're trying to decide which route to take and want to compare the Chaos, Neutral, and Lawful recruits. Either way, I'm here to show you what's available and how to build them. Let's begin. Hello everyone, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Sorry this one took so long to put out. Between other guides that felt more important to release, the reveal of Armored Core 6, the holidays and the New Year, and most recently Sickness, which you may still be able to hear in my voice, my apologies if that's the case, I've been sitting on this script for a while. But it's finally time to get to it. If you're new here, we're trying to reach 15,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so please subscribe if you find the content fun, entertaining, or educational, or you just want to support your local, small YouTube content creator. Thank you. Let's quickly run down the list of characters we'll be discussing today and where/when you'll be getting them. These ones are all fairly easy to get this time around, largely coming to you automatically via the story. If that's all you want to know, I suppose you can close the video now, but if you want to know more about these characters and how to use them, please watch on. Oh, and as always, these are story recruits, so if you're absolutely hell-bent on avoiding any and all spoilers, well, frankly, I don't know why you clicked on this video, but regardless, you have been warned. The recruits are as follows. We have Hobyrim, a unique Swordmaster, who you can acquire after the events at Brigantis Castle. When you step on Bahana Highlands, an unmarked battle will trigger. In this battle, you must keep Hobyrim alive to be able to recruit him. Next up, we have Gildas and Mirdyn, some unique White Knights, some familiar faces to any and all who have played Tactics Ogre Reborn, and they are acquired automatically after returning to Almorica Castle as part of the story. Finally, we have Cerya Phoraena, a unique Valkyrie and sister of Sistina. She joins automatically after the battle with Oz at Boed Fortress. So if you've recruited these characters, how should you best put them to work? Well, we're going to discuss that now. Let's start with Hobyrim, since he is the first of these 4 characters that you'll be recruiting in Chapter 3. Now, Hobyrim may be blind, but as the game is quick to show, that in no way slows him down. In fact, Hobyrim is the second fastest character in the game, tied for the position with Ravnus, and only falling behind one other character who shall go unnamed for the sake of spoilers. Combined with his high physical stats, Hobyrim will quickly become one of your hardest hitting, most efficient units. With massive single target damage output, Swordmasters are great for singling out a dangerous unit and just, frankly, cutting them in half. However, they also come with a suite of healing, buff, and debuff dances that hit in a large area of effect. The 2 big issues with these dances are their MP cost, and specifically for the debuffing dances, their low chance to hit. If you want to use these dances regularly, make sure you pack some MP restoration, and I recommend sticking to the AoE buff dances because you at least want to get some bang for your buck when you spend all that mana on them. The strengthen and fortifying dances in particular are very good for buffing your entire party at the same time. Also of note, Swordmasters get 2 stacking buffs, Mighty Strike and Falling Blade. Mighty Strike is an auto skill that causes your next 2-handed katana attack to deal 25% extra damage, and Falling Blade, which is activatable for 40 MP, causes your next attack to be a guaranteed crit with 100% accuracy, and again, these 2 buffs can stack. Using Mighty Strike at the same time that you have Falling Blade ready to go will let Hobyrim hit far harder than his finishers will the majority of the time, as the damage bonus from Mighty Strike does not apply to them, only to your basic attacks. This has the added bonus of knocking melee enemies back, preventing you from taking counterattacks. Finally, Swordmasters also get an auto skill known as Preempt. This skill grants the Swordmaster the ability to immediately attack any enemy that attacks them in melee range when the skill is active, before the aggressor even gets their initiating attack off. If you crit, well, this will mean that the Swordmaster doesn't even get hit since you've knocked the enemy away, and if you don't crit, you still likely win out, as Preempt stacks with the innate counter that Swordmasters have, giving you 2 attacks to the enemy's 1. Let's talk builds. As far as builds go for Swordmaster, it's really kind of hard to go wrong with Hobyrim. Choosing to have him as a Swordmaster is of course a very reasonable option, leaning into his huge damage potential and high speeds to make him a deadly frontline damage dealer. To facilitate this, all you really need is the strongest two-handed katana you can equip at the time, although you do want to make sure it synergizes with Hobyrim's current element, some light armor to keep his RT down and damage up, leather armor +1 will be your go-to until you can get a Brigandine +1, and a damage boosting accessory such as a Ring of the Horde +1 or a two-handed katana boosting Sunfire earring. Do make sure that you equip an Aryan Plume for the turn 1 damage boost, whatever dances suit your fancy, and the following skills. The two-handed katana skill, of course, Mighty Strike for those random damage boosts, Falling Blade for an activatable critical hit, and either Preempt or Mind's Eye. As we mentioned before, Preempt will lean into the Devil May Care Glass Cannon build, giving you more free damage via extra counterattacks, whereas Mind's Eye will turn Hobyrim into more of a dodge tank by giving him 2 free dodges against melee attacks. Make sure you choose the skill that suits your playstyle or the needs of the battle. Note as well that two-handed katana finishers are of the fire, physical, and dark elements if you're trying to make the best use of elemental affinities and advantages. However, Swordmaster isn't the only viable build path for Hobyrim. I want to quickly advocate for 2 other options here as well, Terror Knight and Berserker. No special gear builds required for these, by the way, just whatever would work best for the class at hand. I really just want to point out the merits of these classes when working with Hobyrim specifically. Due to Hobyrim's naturally high speed and physical attack, he offsets the weaknesses of the Terror Knight and leans directly into the strengths of Berserker. For Terror Knight, it's a famously slow class that is still worth using due to its tanky damage dealing and debuffing capabilities. Hobyrim is able to offset that speed loss due to his naturally high RT, meaning you'll be applying more fears more consistently and at a higher speed, making him a solid choice for the class. Similarly, Berserker is a very good choice due to how fast Hobyrim is. He's more able to equip heavy weapons like two-handed axes and clubs without being too burdened down, and again, more turns means more procs of Berserk and more big numbers dealt to enemy groups. Just, some things to consider as alternate life paths for this Obi-Wan Kenobi tribute. Next up, let's talk Gildas and Mirdyn. These 2 are powerful Knights of Zenobia, and they should be quite familiar to you as they join you as guests the same time that Lancelot does at the beginning of your quest. Upon returning to Almorica Castle after the events at Barnicia, you'll encounter the lads once again. Having survived the conflict at Heim, they decide to join up with Denham and lend you their extremely competent sword arms. This should be a very welcome addition, as both join in the powerful White Knight class. This is quite possibly one of the most powerful classes in the game, if not arguably the most powerful class in the game, so I highly recommend you make use of them. Gildas and Mirdyn have similarly tanky stats with decent physical damage output, but I find that Gildas tends slightly more towards damage, while Mirdyn seems to be a bit tankier and tougher to bring down. As far as White Knight itself is concerned, these are essentially souped up knights. White Knight gets access to everything Knight does with the exception of Phalanx, plus a lot of other incredibly useful utility abilities. Chief among these is the auto ability Velocity Shift, an AoE buff that reduces the RT of all friendly units within 2 tiles by 35, including the user. And of course, if you are not familiar with RT, it's something we've been talking about a lot in this video. RT is basically the count of how soon your unit will take their next turn. So a reduction of 35, pretty solid. You're going to notice your units moving up in the queue very, very fast. Velocity Shift starts at a 40% chance to activate, and this ability will trigger quite often. When you have 2 or more White Knights on the field, it's important to note as well that if they're in range of each other, they can actually apply this buff to each other, causing your team to quickly snowball into faster and faster movement. Now, if you want to get really ridiculous, use Boon of Swiftness on your White Knights, and you'll quickly find yourself achieving escape velocity. You'll be moving so damn fast. Another unique skill of White Knights is Paralysis Blade, also an auto skill, which will grant the Knight Stunbringer, guaranteeing paralysis on their next melee attack. Then, of course, you have staples like Rampart Aura, Guardian Force, and Sanctuary to really make a nuisance of themselves for the enemy. The White Knight can wield fists, swords, two-handed swords, axes, spears, hammers, cudgels, and crossbows. As far as builds are concerned, there's really not a whole lot I can or even really need to say here. Slap on Velocity Shift, whatever weapons you want, some healing magic and heavy armor, and go to town. You can swap around defensive skills to suit your needs on a battle-by-battle basis, but there's really no need to switch Gildas and Mirdyn out of the White Knight class. They're pretty much set from the start, so go nuts. White Knight is one of those classes you will absolutely want on hand for some of the game's more difficult and arduous content. The passive ability to boost your entire party's speed is unquestionably strong, and combined with the defensive capabilities they have, they're a must. Dungeons like the Palace of the Dead, in particular, will be far easier to manage by bringing a White Knight or two, but what if you don't want to use Gildas and Mirdyn? Well, worry not, my friend, as Dame Ravenous and again a certain later recruitable character in the Law route, who shall go unnamed, can also become White Knights so long as you have the marks. Does this mean you can have 4 times the Velocity Shift? Yes, dear viewer. Yes, it does. Finally, let's take a step back from the manic power of the White Knights to talk about Cerya Phoraena, eldest of the Phoraena sisters, and the second to join us on the Chaos route. Like her other sisters, Cerya is a very solid unit, having good all-around physical attacks and speed. She starts as a Valkyrie, same as Sistina, but this time focusing on fire magic instead of air magic. There's really not too much to say about Cerya initially that I haven't already said about Sistina or even Valkyries in the past. Valkyrie is a very good class with its mix of physical and magical damage, strong support abilities like Instill and Conserve MP, access to buff magic like Boon of Swiftness, and the ability to wield summons in the late game. However, something that is important to mention is that Cerya has access to the powerful late game class Shaman. Now note, this is true for all of her sisters as well, but it went unmentioned in my discussion of Sistina, so I want to fix that now. Shaman is one of the absolute best magic classes in the game, and as such, anyone who can use it is immediately top tier. They can use summon magic, draconic magic, and the mighty Apocrypha family of spells. They also gain access to some fun support and auto skills that focus on the elements, boosting their utility just that little bit further. And speaking of the elements, each shaman does have a forced elemental affinity, and Cerya's is, unsurprisingly, fire. Because of this, even if you aren't a fan of Valkyries for some reason, it's still worth considering Cerya for use in some capacity so she's trained up and ready once you can switch her to Shaman. I have seen people use her as an enchantress or a witch to really lean into that spellcasting role before you wind up unblocking Shaman. And there's even been one mad lad who I spoke to who made her a beast tamer, and thanks to her good stat spread, all of them can be viable. As far as builds are concerned, I did mention a few classes that you can use Cerya in already, and there's really nothing too special about how you're going to use them compared to, say, a generic unit in the same class. If you want to make Cerya into a witch or enchantress, or even something fancier like a beast tamer or a swordmaster, go for it. You'll be able to let her superior stats carry you to victory until you can make her into a shaman if you so choose. Speaking of Shaman, I'm going to be doing a whole deep dive into the class in its own video, detailing its full capabilities as well as the quest to unlock it, all of which would be too much for a simple video like this, so we won't be going over builds for that here. Instead, let's just take a quick walk through a sample Valkyrie build for this fiery resistance leader. I like to make Cerya a sword and shield specialist. I've always found that she's a tad bulkier than her sisters, and making it easier for her to tank damage while in the scrum leans into that. I would recommend a full set of Balder gear to aid Cerya's magic damage output earlier in the game, as well as a Ring of Intellect to do the same. As better gear becomes available, I would suggest you give her a stronger sword so her physical attacks hit harder, and as you get into craftable and endgame dungeon loot, you can get powerful armor like the Alluring or Fire sets that will boost your damage nicely as well. For consumables, a standard array will work nicely. A Blessing Stone is always useful, as well as Arian Plumes and Spirit Stones of the Stars to boost both of your damage types, as you will be using both on a Valkyrie. Finally, I like to pack a Fruit of the Adept for cheap emergency MP boosting and healing, as both will likely be needed in a melee spellcaster. Your spells are simple as well. Pack your most powerful level of Spark Sphere, Instill Fire, a heal spell, and Boon of Swiftness. Once you're far enough to have access to it, I would consider swapping out either Spark Sphere or Heal for the Fire Summon magic, with your choice hinging on if you have enough healing from other sources to afford to lose it here. Finally, let's talk skills. As always, you want your weapon skill of choice. Like I said, for me, that's swords. but do what you like best. Then, you always want Meditate and Conserve MP for your Valkyries. It's an absolute must. For your last slot, however, you're a little bit more flexible. I personally like Constitution to make Cerya that extra little bit more durable, but you can swap that for Steadfast if you're worried about being knocked off ledges, or Resist Charm or Petrify if there's some annoying status effects that are going to get thrown around. Really, whatever utility you need in the moment. By doing this, you will ensure that Cerya is not only a capable resistance leader, but a skilled frontline fighter who you can count on time and time again to dish out damage in melee and at range, and be remarkably difficult to bring down, so long as she has just the barest amount of support. And there we have it. Much delayed, again, apologies for that, but that's your coverage for the 4 major recruits of Chapter 3 Chaos in Tactics Ogre Reborn. I hope you all found this useful. If you have any questions or any particular builds you enjoy for these characters, pop into the comments and let us know. Y'all always manage to spark some good conversation in topics like these, and I'd love to see what it is that you have to say. As always, thank you for all the support, plenty more Tactics Ogre coverage to come, as well as Fire Emblem Engage, which is alarmingly right over the horizon. Again, my name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night, stay safe and healthy out there, and remember, be good to each other. Bye now. Time for me to go rest my voice. God, I can feel it shattering under the weight of my meaty exaltations.